Reddit users, please share your incredible coincidences stories.
I was at a store and noticed a man with the same exact shirt as me. As I was about to make a comment, he turned around and we saw that we were identical twins who were separated at birth.
I had a dream that my friend's house burned down, and I called her to make sure everything was okay. She told me that she had just put out a small fire in her kitchen.
My husband and I were thinking about moving to a new city, and we randomly ran into a friend from high school who had just moved there. She helped us find a great apartment and made the transition so much easier.
I was studying abroad in Italy and met a woman who looked just like my grandmother. It turns out that she was my grandmother's long-lost sister who had moved to Italy many years ago.
I lost my phone on a bus, and later that day, my mom found the same exact phone model on the side of the road. It turned out to be my phone, which had fallen out of my pocket while I was biking earlier.
My husband and I were on a cruise, and we randomly ran into a couple we had met years earlier, on a completely different cruise. It was like seeing old friends in a completely unexpected place.
I was on a flight, and randomly sat next to a guy who was from the same small town as me. We struck up a conversation and found out that we had all sorts of mutual connections, including distant relatives and childhood friends. It was a surreal and wonderful coincidence.
I was on a solo trip in Japan and randomly met a guy who was from the same small town as me, on the other side of the world. We had never met before, but we had all sorts of mutual connections. It was like a strange sort of homecoming.
I was listening to a song that reminded me of my friend who had passed away. As I was thinking about him, a random person approached me and asked if I knew the meaning of the lyrics, because they were thinking about their deceased friend too.
I had a dream about a friend I hadn't seen in a long time, and the next day she called me out of the blue to catch up.
I had a dream about a friend I hadn't seen in a long time, and the next day she called me out of the blue to catch up.
I was in a job interview and realized that the interviewer and I had gone to the same college and had several mutual friends.
I was taking a walk and saw a random object on the ground. I picked it up, and it turned out to be a key that belonged to a friend who had been looking for it for weeks.
My best friend and I have the same exact dream every year on the same night, without fail. I was driving down a back road at night and saw a man in the middle of the road. As I swerved to avoid him, I saw that he looked exactly like me. It was like seeing my own doppelganger.
I was hiking in the woods and came across an abandoned cabin. As I was exploring it, I found a diary that belonged to a woman who had died years earlier. When I read it, I realized that she had been writing about the exact same things that were happening to me in my life at that moment.
My husband and I were on vacation in Italy, and we decided to take a random side street while exploring the city. As we walked down the street, we saw a man who looked exactly like my husband's long-lost uncle, who had disappeared decades earlier. My husband approached the man, and it turned out to be his uncle. He had moved to Italy years ago and had lost touch with the family. It was a surreal and emotional reunion.
My sister and I were both pregnant at the same time, due only a few weeks apart. We went to our first ultrasound appointments on the same day, at different hospitals. When we compared our ultrasound photos, we noticed that they were nearly identical. It was a beautiful and eerie coincidence.
My dad and I both won the lottery on the same day, using the same numbers we always play.
My husband and I randomly bumped into a couple that we had met on a cruise a few years earlier, on a completely different continent.
I was at a party and met a guy who looked exactly like my deceased brother. When I told him about my brother, he revealed that he had also lost a brother with the same name and birthday as mine. It felt like a strange sort of cosmic connection.
I was driving on a highway and saw a car accident happen right in front of me. When I stopped to help, I saw that the person who had been in the accident was my high school sweetheart, who I hadn't seen in years. It felt like a strange twist of fate.
I was watching a TV show and noticed that the actor looked familiar. It turns out he was a childhood friend who I hadn't seen in years.
I found a message in a bottle on the beach, and it turned out to be from a childhood friend who I hadn't spoken to in years.
My boyfriend and I were at a music festival, and we decided to see a band we had never heard of before. As we were standing in the crowd, we bumped into his ex-girlfriend, who he hadn't seen in years. She was there with her new boyfriend, and it was an awkward and unexpected reunion.
I was at a wedding and met a woman who was from the same small town as me. We struck up a conversation and found out that her grandfather had worked with my grandfather at the same factory, and her mother had gone to school with my aunt. We had never met before, but we had all these weird connections.
My cousin and I were born on the same day, at the same hospital, and our moms were in the same room.
I was on a flight and sat next to someone who was reading the same book as me. We struck up a conversation and ended up discovering that we had a lot in common.
I was at a funeral and saw a woman who looked exactly like my deceased grandmother. When I asked who she was, I found out that she was a distant cousin who I had never met before. It felt like my grandmother was reaching out to me from beyond the grave.
Please share your stories below. Maybe someday I will create a video about your incredible coincidence stories.